Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy, understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to this February 26, 14 edition of Nightcast. Friends, tonight in the news, there's a lot of stories still out of the Ukraine. We have stories tonight elsewhere around the world. More news related to the Red Seal happening tonight. And we have news about the upcoming elections in Europe with the EU. A lot of news you should know about tonight. But first, let's start off with the continuing upheaval out of the Ukraine with a new government to be presented even during our live news tonight to the Kiev crowds.
Most of the men in these pictures were shot, many of them killed by security forces who were loyal to the then president, Viktor Yanukovych. He's on the run, accused of mass murder, but the authorities today took some action against those who pulled the trigger, disbanding Ukraine's much-hated specialist riot police, the Bakut.
We had always called on them to be stood down, but now people have died, so those responsible must be punished.
At the parliament, attempts are continuing to form a new coalition government, but at the moment it's men like this who control the streets around it. Convincing some to give up their newfound power may not be easy.
This is Independence Square, and tonight this will become the scene of a kind of political talent contest, with Ukraine's wannabe leaders appealing to the crowds for their approval ahead of a vote in Parliament tomorrow.
Ousted President Yanukovych's extravagant mansion continues to be a source of anger. Its zoo and its sauna mocked for the levels of greed and corruption. The millions he spent on himself now documented on a website called Yanukovych Leaks. Meanwhile, there's still concern a Cold War-style conflict could break out between Russia and the West. Many in the international community are urging calm.
This is not a zero-sum game. It is not a West versus East. It should not be. It is not Russia or the United States or other choices. This is about the people of Ukraine and Ukrainians making their choice about their future.
What that future is remains uncertain. In the eastern city of Kharkiv, pro-Russian demonstrators are in a standoff with those who support the demonstrations in Kiev. It shows just how hard it will be for whatever new unity government emerges to heal the divisions in the country.
And friends, that was Duncan Crawford with that report. And during that report, as you heard toward the end of it there, United States Secretary of State John Kerry said Ukraine is not in a battle between East and West. That's John Kerry speaking. And yet the East and West is more or less battling over the Ukraine. Russia would like to have it and its business, and on the east, and then on the west side of the Ukraine, that is, the United Europe would like to be doing business there. And yet Ukraine is in, as you'll see in further stories tonight, Ukraine is in terrible economic situation. Ukraine's Arseniy Yatsenyuk warns of tough days ahead.
Ukraine will be united, and despite the fact that the number of outside and domestic forces try to split my country, we will do our utmost in order to preserve the territorial integrity and unity of my country.
What about separatist forces in Crimea? Are you concerned about them?
We will cope with this. This is not the news that in Crimea we always had, I would say, different sentiments and different forces who tried to split the country and who proclaimed separatism in my country. And today, in these very dramatic times for Ukraine, when Ukraine is facing a huge turbulence and outstanding, I would say, political and economic challenges, some political forces try to grab, I would say, Ukraine.
And what about your relationship with Russia? Do you think you're going to maintain good relations with Russia?
In order to maintain good relations, we need to build up good relations. So the key task for us is to build a new type of relations with our Russian partners, because we strongly believe that Russia is not a neighbor, but Russia is a partner.
And what about the reaction from the crowd today? Do you think you have the support of the people here in Independence Square and the rest of Ukraine for this national unity government which you're trying to form?
It's crystal clear that people want to get changes. But the key task for the new government is to stabilize the situation. And we are to undertake extremely unpopular steps. As the previous government and previous president were so corrupted that country is in a desperate financial plight. We are on the brink of the disaster. And this is the government of political suiciders. So, welcome to hell.
Welcome to hell, he says. Friends, Ukraine's new interim government has been presented at Kiev's main protest camp, the Maidan, following last week's ousting of President Viktor Yanukovych. The Maidan Council named Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who you were just hearing speaking, to become prime minister. The cabinet, to be voted on by the members of parliament tomorrow, includes leading activist Gavin Hewitt has a report on this.
In these revolutionary days in Ukraine, this is what it takes to form a government. The men and women selected to become ministers were paraded on stage in Independence Square in front of a vast crowd. The interim president said unpopular decisions would have to be taken to avoid default. There were some angry shouts. Then the list of ministers was read out. Most were applauded, but some protesters from a nationalist party objected that their candidate hadn't got the defence ministry. The new Prime Minister spoke to the BBC.
We are on the brink of the disaster, and this is the government of political suiciders. So, welcome to hell.
Earlier, outside Parliament, they were removing the fences that kept the protesters out. Now the people will be able to confront MPs directly. Law and order is still in the hands of numerous civil defence groups. Today it was announced that the hated Special Riot Police had been disbanded. The new leaders are acutely aware that their power comes from those who fought in the main square. This is hospital number 17, where many of the 2,000 people injured were brought. Among them is 21-year-old Olesya Zhukovska. She became a symbol of the protest when she wrote on social media, "I am dying."
I immediately thought I would die. As a medic, I know that people die from such neck wounds. I'm a medical worker. The sniper was totally without compassion. All of this cannot be for nothing, because there has been too much blood.
And here's the dilemma. The mood amongst the people is for a thorough cleaning out of the old guard, but that takes time, and Ukraine is in urgent need of a credible government now, because the country is in danger of running out of funds. At the central bank today, they watched the Ukrainian currency hit an all-time low. And in the Crimean city of Simferopol, there were clashes. Pro-Russians who oppose the new government in Kiev scuffled with mainly Crimean Tatars who oppose any suggestion of breaking away from Ukraine. The Russians ordered a massive military exercise close to Ukraine's border, but said it was unconnected to events there. In Kiev, there is still mourning. On a day Ukraine's new leaders warned the country is on the brink of disaster. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Kiev.
And friends, documents that were disposed of in a reservoir when ousted President Viktor Yanukovych left Ukraine have been found and are now being dried in his sauna.
The papers were thrown in the river and they were wet. Actually, about 160 folders like this were taken from the river, and each folder consisted from 100 to 500 pages. And the problem was that if we wouldn't rescue the dogs within 72 hours, they would die. And our volunteers were just sitting and taking the sheets of the paper and separating them with the blank white sheet of paper that will absorb the water and preserve the documents.
And they're drying out here because this is the warmest part.
Yeah, the floor is warm, and we have sauna where we also put the dogs to make them dry faster. We didn't switch here the high temperature, but because of the dry air and because of the natural warm, it gets dry faster. Next group or next phase of the processing of the dogs is scanning, either through the scanner or taking the pictures, the photos of the documents.
What kind of documents are they? What do they tell us?
There are financial documents of several companies. There are documents of several charity foundations that were actually used to gather the money for the residents and for Yanukovych. And there are a lot of financial documents with the contractors, with the other companies that might reveal the system of the network of the companies that were involved in all these financial transactions. And part of the documents were burned. Probably when the people from here were escaping, they discovered that they have no time to burn all documents, so they considered to throw them to the river. We have another document for 16 million hryvnia, which is 2 million US dollars, for the furniture for the galleon, the boat, and this is for the restaurant and the boat. We found also another document with the same company that should supply another furniture for the same boat for 41.5 million hryvnia, which is almost $4 million.
Just for furniture?
Just for furniture, and that's. I think that we can find even more this kind of letters asking for the payment. So there are a lot of documents that shows exaggerated or extremely high expenses for this luxury furniture, for this luxury houses, and for all this stuff that was done by the companies that were working here.
Well, friends, you know, God likes quality. He likes his leaders to have quality. And I am not saying that the leaders in the Ukraine are God's representatives, but this story might remind some of you of some accusations which used to be made against some of God's leaders for having nice things and calling it extravagance or whatever. It's actually nice to see nice things, you know. But if a leader is godly and he cares about his people and he's helping them and the country over which he leads is doing well, why should he not have nice things? But if he's having nice things to the extreme while everybody else is suffering, and if he doesn't really care about the people and he just wants to go his way and not care about the rest of the people in the country, well, could be and is a very different story. But talk about the economic situation of the country amid the rapidly changing situation in Ukraine. The finance minister has said that $35 billion, that would be 21 billion British pound sterlings, will be needed over the next 2 years. The BBC's Tim Wilcock spoke to Zelio Yaroslav from National Institute for Strategic Studies about the country's economic future.
It's another big day for the Ukrainian revolution. I'm outside the Parliament building. It's not sitting today because politicians are trying to put together some national unity government. The big question is, how are these groups here, for example, who've been protecting this building, going to be represented in the new lineup? And the other key question is, how are they going to sort out the Ukrainian economy? Well, with me now is Yaroslav Jalilo from the National Institute for Strategic Studies. How bad a condition is the economy in here?
Ukrainian economy now has to continue its normal function. The normal function means the payments on external debts, it means the payments on the internal debts, and it means the serving of the state budget, means to pay wages, pensions, the utilities of the budget organizations, and so on.
So this new government, if it goes into power tomorrow, it's going to need some international aid very quickly.
I think that the most direct way to finance the requirements of the economy is, of course, economic growth and economic development. But in spite of this wish, we do not have now the basement to start this economic growth, because it is very serious shock for the economists, for the entrepreneurs, for the people. So far, of course, the economic aid, the financial aid, is necessary just to, as soon as possible, to make these payments in these weeks, in the previous
because I mean, some people are suggesting that you need maybe say €5 billion or $5 billion in a matter of days. Otherwise, nothing will get paid here.
It is very difficult to calculate the precise requirement, because first of all, we do not have precise statistics and do not have transparent information about this. The economy now is in difficult situation due to the economic depression, and I think that probably the economists in their conversations with the international experts have to determine what is the most urgent requirement, what has to be paid just in medium term.
Okay, Yaroslav Jalilo, thank you very much indeed. Well, this country owes many, many billions of dollars to the IMF already, and the original deal with the EU had a lot of strings attached, for example, restructuring the economy, and people here say it's too soon to embark on something like that. They need this cash very quickly.
Friends, turning to another story now, here's June Kelly with a report on the sentencing of the men who hacked to death soldier Lee Rigby in Woolwich, southeast London, in May of last year.
It's 10 weeks since Lee Rigby's killers were convicted. Today they were brought back to the Old Bailey for sentencing. Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale saw themselves as soldiers of Allah. Adebolajo described Lee Rigby's killing as an act of war. So Fusilier Rigby, who had survived the battlefields of Afghanistan, lost his life in a barbaric act on a London street. In court for the sentencing, those who loved Lee Rigby. The prosecutor said their lives had been changed forever for the worse.
The Rigby family welcomes the whole life and significant sentences that have been passed down on Lee's killers. We feel that no other sentence would have been acceptable, and we would like to thank the judge and the courts for handing down what we believe to be the right prison terms. We'd also like to thank everyone who has supported us in the last 9 months. It has brought us a lot of comfort, and we feel satisfied that justice has been served for Lee. It just remains to be said. Rest in peace, Lee.
Well, dear friends, I tend to take a little exception to that. I think spending tax money to keep these guys housed in a prison and fed and warmed at the expense of the rest of the country, it would be much more merciful to give those men their wish, execute them. But people don't understand God and God's way. God can and would resurrect the men when Satan's not here after 1,000 years of the reign of Jesus Christ on this earth as King of Kings. And it set a much better example, too, to help give them what they want. They want to be executed. Let them be executed for such a heinous, hideous crime. Yuck.
Adebowale waited for the police to arrive, and their plan was to be shot by firearms officers marshing themselves as they saw it. Adebolajo ran at the police with a meat cleaver. The officer who shot him didn't even have time to get out of the car. Adebowale was then surrounded. In one hand a revolver, in the other a knife. He too was shot. These two men wanted to end their lives together on their chosen day with the world watching. Instead, they will now spend the rest of their lives apart, and Michael Adebolajo on the left will die behind bars.
Okay, that's the story, the current story on that. Friends, residents of a town in northeast Nigeria are furious at the Nigerian security forces for withdrawing checkpoints ahead of a bloody attack by Islamist militants on a local school.
This is what's left of the boarding school after the suspected Islamist militants came at night to kill and destroy. They targeted the boys' dormitory, which was still smouldering the morning after. At least 29 teenage students were shot, cut down or consumed by the fire here. Many parents were unable to identify their loved ones, who were burnt beyond recognition. The female students were set free with a message to go and get married and give up school. The militant group Boko Haram opposes secular education. The governor of Yobe state visited the scene and saw the devastation. He criticised the military for a slow response to the appalling attack.
It was unfortunate that up to the 4-hour period or 5 hours of killings and massacre, there were no any security men around to contain the situation.
Nigeria's President Goodluck Jonathan condemned the attack by what he called deranged terrorists who had lost all human morality. He said the fight against terrorism would continue with vigour. Earlier this week, the president, though, hit out at the governor of Borno state for saying Boko Haram fighters were better armed and more motivated than Nigeria's armed forces.
But if it is what we said is correct, then I'll pull out the military from Borno state for 1 month. But I'll go back and take over the state.
The attacks in northeast Nigeria have been relentless, with over 300 people killed this year alone. Many others have died in smaller raids, all blamed on the Islamist militants. The Nigerian government says the fight against Boko Haram is being hampered because it says the militants keep fleeing across the border into Cameroon after each attack. It says what's needed is a regional, even an international response. The Interior Minister of Nigeria has now told me that France is going to be asked to lend a hand. The hope, it seems, is that the country that once colonised Cameroon is going to ask it to come on board and join in the fight against Boko Haram and increase the pressure on the militants. But questions over the strategy and capacity of the Nigerian armed forces are growing louder. People who witnessed the latest attack say that soldiers had been protecting the school for some time, but inexplicably withdrew the day before the Boko Haram militants struck.
And friends, in August last year we showed you video of the killing of 44 at a Nigeria mosque. And then in the following month of September last year, 2013 I'm talking about, we showed you video of dozens being killed in another attack in Nigeria. And now in today's story, we have news of this most bloody attack by Islamist militants on a local Nigerian school. Friends, don't ho-hum this. Bring it home. Bring it home. Feel the emotion by imagining that this were a school in your neighborhood, and the children who were just burned beyond recognition today were either your own children or your grandchildren, or those of your closest friends, or your younger brothers and sisters or cousins, someone you knew and loved who you won't be seeing tonight, as these people won't be seeing their loved ones in Nigeria tonight from this hideous thing. If you don't have your own children, or if you're a child, think of how you would feel if it were friends of yours who just died in such a hideous killing, in this murderous raid at a local school in Nigeria today. Friends, on a little bit lighter note, Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan faces corruption claim.
Protesters demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Riot police respond with water cannon and tear gas. It's further fallout from a corruption scandal that broke in December when a number of his allies were arrested on suspicion of corruption. This week, what appears to be a recorded conversation between the Prime Minister and his son Bilal was posted online. In it, the Prime Minister is allegedly ordering his son to get rid of millions of euros in cash from their home during a corruption investigation. He flatly denies the allegation and condemns the recording as a fake. He says the leaked audio is a shameless montage by political rivals to bring him down.
This is a treacherous attack against the Prime Minister of the Turkish Republic. I would like to underline this is not an attack against Recep Tayyip Erdogan or the leader of the AK party. This is a callous attack against Turkey's Prime Minister.
But on the street, some voters are not convinced.
There's no smoke without fire. I'm sure the recordings are real. As Prime Minister, when he wants to, he says, I'm a prosecutor, I'm a judge, I'm a mayor, I'm a minister. He's not a statesman. He doesn't befit us.
The recordings couldn't be independently verified, but the inquiry is a major challenge to Mr. Erdogan's 11 years in power ahead of key local elections in March. Marie Goy, BBC News.
Friends, the BBC's China correspondent Damian Grammaticus now has a report from there on smog in China.
Just to go outside, you need a gas mask. Her cloth one really isn't good enough. Smog, smothering Beijing, one of the world's biggest cities, now barely fit to live in. Some scientists say the effect is like a nuclear winter, starving everything of sunlight. China's economic path just isn't sustainable, he says. And she adds, moving's no good. Most cities in China are like this. It's China's pollution crisis, dissatisfaction rising as awareness grows of the health impact. Hundreds of thousands of premature deaths, up to 5 years lost from average life expectancies. On days like this, people should stay indoors, advises Dr. Zhang. Outdoors, they staged a fun run last weekend. There wasn't much fun in the smog. As Chinese get richer, they're paying more and more attention to their quality of life. So small individual acts of protest like this one by a Beijing artist are spreading. Students fed up with choking on the smog. China's communist leaders worry the anger could gather momentum, so the president made a rare public appearance yesterday. The party's propaganda is keen to show he's breathing the same air.
The political impact of the smog is serious. People are very unhappy. If it isn't fixed, it may even trigger big demonstrations and undermine the government's legitimacy.
And friends, we'll be back at the end of tonight's program with another story from China showing a certain economic climate in China. What I want to show you next, though, and we're going to go do an extended program tonight and show you how certain things work in the EU Parliament and in the EU Commission and in the EU Council. We're going to pull some video out of the archive to give you behind the scenes of just how the setup is structured over there in the EU. But next, and if you have to go at our regular time here, I'll understand, but I want you to be sure and catch at least this story related to Europe. Politicians in Europe are gearing up for elections in 3 months' time. And this is from today's news, telling us ahead of time about what's coming up in 3 months. Elections coming up in 3 months' time amid a rising tide of anti-EU sentiment.
In the markets of France, you quickly discover how powerful anti-EU sentiment is becoming. In this, a founding member of the EU and its largest country, it is the Front National leading the polls. And what does it want?
We need to get out of the European Union bit by bit. First leave the euro, then tighten our borders, step by step, until Europe becomes an empty shell.
They're not the only ones on the march in the European Parliament.
Look at the Conservative MEPs here. For 5 years nearly.
Meet Britain's UKIP, campaigning to get the UK out of the EU.
Is this year, do you think, the moment for parties like yours, anti-European parties?
Yes, I believe it is. But it isn't just in the UK now. We are seeing a rising tide of Euroscepticism across the European Union. Because they're finding out a little bit more about it. Remember, these treaties have been signed with not a lot of publicity as to what is really happening, that we are building one country.
One country for him means a federal Europe. The same rules for all. Countries' budgets closely watched over by Brussels. Countries' border controls gone. Immigration booths gathering dust.
This is a great illustration of what the EU has achieved. A continent without borders, you can drive between two countries without even noticing it. And yet for many people, an increasing number, this is also a very good illustration that the EU has gone too far.
But in different countries there are different levels of concern. So parties wanting to limit the EU's powers are a varied bunch. The most Eurosceptic are the Front National and UKIP, and others like the Dutch PVV. There's the extreme Golden Dawn in Greece, but also those who want to keep the EU but limit its powers, like Italy's Five Star Movement and Poland's Law and Justice Party.
The big question is to what extent then, if they do enter the parliament, they will be able to stay together, stay united, vote jointly on the important issues. It's not clear what their agenda is beyond control of immigration and maybe abandoning the euro.
Germany also has its new Eurosceptics. As the flags on the AfD's cupcake show, they don't want to abandon the EU altogether. But across Europe, a desire to reform the EU is growing, and its leaders will have to recognise that.
Friends, we know that ultimately what comes down to a United States of Europe coming out of this EU situation over there will be 5 countries, states, or regions from the east and 5 from the west. And as the Bible describes them, there'll be 5 of miry clay and 5 of iron. And iron and clay doesn't mix, meaning these 2 regions, the east and the west, they won't get along. And yet, because of some event that triggers their coming together in a federation, a strong union, both monetarily, which they're already structuring and working, and not only a monetary union, but a banking union. They'll also come together politically, as they're shaping now and structuring and restructuring, because as you heard in this report, some of the Israelite nations, even Brother Reuben, France is Eurosceptic and not happy. So France may ultimately be coming out of there, and it'll become a federation that is against the sons of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel prophetically. And something will trigger it coming together so that they give their power to what the Bible calls a beast, a new emperor who will likely be crowned in Frankfurt, Germany. Greetings, Paul Kiefer, who's stationed in Germany now and serving out of Germany now, I should say. A new emperor will be crowned, not a Frankish emperor, but a Syrian, a German emperor, be crowned in Frankfurt, Germany, where many of the emperors from the past, the emperors of the old Holy Roman Empire, had their coronation ceremonies and where they were crowned by the Pope. And this new Pope Now, this new emperor will be crowned by the Pope because the Roman Catholic Church will ride, is what the Bible describes as the woman who will ride this beast. And that'll be your Roman Catholic Church, may be the present Pope, may be a former Pope coming back into power, may be a brand new Pope we haven't even seen or heard of yet. But in this last story, voters across the continent will elect 751 members of European Parliament, MEPs, when they cast their ballots in May. Now that was Matthew Price with this in this report from this last video. Matthew will be with us again in this next video. Now that was from today's current news. This next video I pulled out of the archive going back to July of last year. It features Matthew Price in a little 90-second summary of the way the European Union is organized, which can appear confusing and bound up in red tape from the outside, but each of the EU's institutions play their own important part in the union's. They have checks and balances, and they're going to make it work where the United States is kind of wimping out on its checks and balances. Everybody, you hardly see any difference now, and everybody, horrible in the United States, the way it's going down. In just 90 seconds, Brussels correspondent Matthew Price will explain in this video the role of the European Council in determining policy.
Now, the Commission and Parliament presumably won't agree, but this very dull building is arguably the most powerful part of the EU. The Council is the meeting forum for the EU's 28 member countries, and in this room they argue over policy. So if it's about how many fish we can catch from our seas, 28 fisheries ministers come. Immigration, home affairs ministers. But for the most important stuff, the leaders come here. Well before the leaders actually arrive here, their ambassadors and officials have spent weeks negotiating a whole host of issues, looking in detail at laws that the Commission is proposing, trying to come to an agreed position on more pressing matters like tackling the Eurozone crisis. And if all 28 can agree, then it puts the Council in a much stronger position when it comes to negotiating with the Commission and Parliament. But what's most interesting is when they can't agree on something. That's when national governments struggle against the rest to protect their own interest. It's when pacts are formed and bargains are struck. Now, to help so many countries come to an agreement, they have a president. There he is. The member states elect him. For the most important decisions, sanctions on Syria, unanimity is needed. But for most, it's not. It passes with a weighted majority vote. Usually it's the big players who get what they want, and the decisions that they take over the years determine how integrated or not the EU becomes.
And friends, Matthew Price again in another video explaining how another function of the EU works.
The European Commission employs 30,000 people. They speak 24 official languages, and up there on the 13th floor, once a week, in this room, the Commission President and 27 commissioners all meet. Now, it is they and their teams who are the only part of the European Union that can propose law. But remember, it's the European Parliament and the countries that make up the Union who decide whether to adopt those rules. This week's meeting is about to begin. Now, the commissioners are chosen by the member states. There is one from each, and they all have different areas that they focus on. So there's someone for transport, a commissioner for health, one for agriculture.
Sometimes they get it wrong. Agriculture officials proposed an olive oil rule to protect consumers, but it would have also led to the restaurant dipping bowl being outlawed. A few days of negative headlines, and they quickly dropped that one. Better examples are rules reducing mobile phone roaming charges, limiting greenhouse gas emissions, ensuring the rights of air passengers.
As well as proposing laws, the Commission has the power to ensure the agreed rules are enforced. It can punish member states that break the rules. It also takes the lead on trade and competition issues. And as part of the efforts to help tackle the Eurozone crisis, it has powers to scrutinise EU government budgets.
In short, the people who work inside this building like to think of themselves as the guardians of the European Union.
Now, friends, that was Matthew Price with how the Commission, the EU Commission, works. In this next 90-second video, Matthew Price will explain how the democratically elected European Parliament works. He'll explain this in just 90 seconds. Matthew?
You're looking at one of the biggest parliaments in the world. This place represents over 500 million people. There are more than 750 members of the European Parliament. They stand in their home country and they're elected for a 5-year term. And they are the EU's only directly elected representatives. This vast parliament has been given the power to keep in check the two other main institutions in the EU, the Commission and the 28 countries that make up the Union. Much of that power lies behind the scenes in rooms like this, where parliamentary committees and party groups meet to scrutinise proposed legislation. Then you also have MEPs meeting the Council and the Commission in what's called trilogue. It's an increasingly efficient way of trying to fast-track legislation. But remember, the Parliament still has to vote on all of these policies, and if it chooses to, it can throw a spanner in the works. When they do vote, they don't do it here at the Brussels Parliament building. Instead, they rush 5 hours down the tracks to France at huge cost once a month for the full Parliament session in Strasbourg. Here, they have their say on most EU policy. They sign off the EU budget, they supervise the Commission, and can dismiss it. Historically in the EU, it's been the member states that have got their way, but this is a parliament that's growing increasingly assertive and confident in wielding its powers.
Now, friends, in this final video tonight of how things behind the scenes work related to the EU, Brussels correspondent Matthew Price, who you've been seeing in the previous videos, in this one he got access to the corridors of power at the EU's diplomatic corps, the European External Action Service, and in this video he'll show us how the EU deals with the rest of the world.
So, who do you call if you want to talk to Europe? Well, this wouldn't be a bad telephone to get through to. This is the office of the European Union's top foreign policy official. And yet, how much power really exists at the end of this line? Welcome to the tongue twister of the European External Action Service, the EU's diplomatic corps. From here, they promote the EU's common foreign policy. It's aimed to prevent conflicts and to manage crises. So they've pressured Serbia and Kosovo to resolve their differences, patrolled for pirates off Somalia, created sanctions against Syria and Iran. They run trading missions worldwide and have embassies in almost every UN state. Now, from these offices, they propose policy. The EU's foreign ministers decide how they want that policy to work, and then here they implement it. But it's a cumbersome process, and they often can't react swiftly enough to world events. Cumbersome because all 28 countries in the EU have to agree the policy. But that also is a strength. Working together, they argue they have more power and influence. But don't you dare call this the EU's foreign ministry. Most EU countries still jealously guard their own national foreign policy, and they don't want to give up any more power to the person at the end of the phone here.
Okay, friends, now in our last story tonight, you know, one of the things we do as we watch news for you here on Nightcast is we keep our eyes on economic conditions in the Gentile world that could cause the kind of frustration among the Gentiles that will cause them to further develop their 200 million man army that we can anticipate in the latter days, and that's been prophesied. And so we keep an eye on things like the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And in today's news, the stock exchange unveils its financial performance for 2013. Analysts expect profits to rise by nearly 15%. And here's with the report on this is the BBC's Hong Kong correspondent, Juliana Liu.
This is China's top international-facing stock exchange. The Hong Kong Bourse is home to some of the world's biggest companies, including mainland lender ICBC and the oil giant PetroChina. But after years of headline-grabbing mega listings, the market for initial public offerings has cooled. Market analyst Louis Wong says that's because of the Chinese government efforts to moderate economic expansion.
A lot of economic data shows that China's economy is slowing down, so it's not certain whether China can attain 7.5% economic growth this year.
He says investors are hoping Chinese internet giant Alibaba lists in Hong Kong this year, potentially raising billions of dollars and boosting trading activity, which is a major source of revenue for the stock exchange. Its financial performance will also be affected by the London Metal Exchange, purchased in 2012. The world's largest commodities market is trying to win business in China. All that would help boost the Hong Kong Bourse's bottom line. For years, this was the destination of choice for the largest Chinese companies. And as the economy there stabilizes, investors hope the flow of new listings will begin again. Juliana, the BBC News, Hong Kong.
Now, friends, even though, if you followed this report closely, even though analysts expect profits to rise by nearly 15%, the Bourse's fortunes have largely followed China's, and while growth has been encouraging this year, it's still a far cry from the boom years when multi-billion-dollar Chinese listings drove earnings. Friends, that's it for tonight's report. We did an extended report tonight to give you a look at the EU and the upcoming elections set for May this year, and to give you a little behind-the-scene look at how the EU works in various ways. God willing, and the creek don't... That's it for this Wednesday night report, though, friends. God willing, and the creek don't rise, the streets don't freeze over, whatever. We will plan to be back tomorrow night, Thursday evening, with our next edition of the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd, saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.